The man sitting alone at the corner table, pale as winter moonlight, hair like spun silver under the candlelight, was not waiting for anyone, and that suited him perfectly fine. Seraphina Thorne was 8 minutes late, breathless, and absolutely certain she had the right person. She dropped into the chair across from him with enough force to rattle the wine glasses, dumped her purse on the pristine white tablecloth, and announced, "You must be my blind date. I'm so sorry I'm late." The subway decided to stage a personal vendetta against punctuality. Ezekiel Hargrave, who had ruled the vampire courts of the eastern seaboard for 3 centuries and answered to no living soul save his own conscience, looked up from the wine list he had been pretending to read. He had come to this rooftop restaurant for one reason. The owner owed him answers about missing shipments that had nothing to do with wine or food. He had planned to conduct his business quietly, deliver his judgment, and leave before the mortal crowds grew too thick, too warm, too fragrant with pulse and breath. The woman now sitting across from him was flushed from running, dark curls escaping a clip that had given up any pretense of control, brown eyes bright with apology and something like relief. She was perhaps 26, wearing a dress that looked hastily chosen, and she smelled like hospital antiseptic and vanilla lotion. He should have corrected her immediately. "Traffic," he said instead, his voice low and precise, "is always unpredictable." "Oh, thank God you're understanding. I was worried. Well, you know how first impressions go." She beamed at him, and something in Ezekiel's chest, something he had thought calcified beyond all feeling, shifted. "I'm Sarah. Well, Seraphina, but only my mom calls me that when I'm in trouble." "Ezekiel." He set down the wine list. Across the restaurant, the owner had emerged from the kitchen and frozen upon seeing him. Good. Let the man sweat. This interruption was unexpected, perhaps even welcome. "What would you like to drink?" "Whatever you're having." "I trust your judgment." She laughed, a bright sound that turned heads at neighboring tables. "That's probably a terrible strategy for a first date, huh? Admitting I know nothing about wine?" "Honesty," Ezekiel said, raising one finger to summon the server with the barest gesture, "is rarely a terrible strategy." The server appeared instantly, eyes widening slightly when he recognized Ezekiel. The vampire ordered in fluent Italian, something complex that made the server nod with approval, and then the young man disappeared toward the bar. "Show off," Sarah said, but she was grinning. "Let me guess you traveled through Europe, fell in love with the wine country, and now you're insufferable about vintages." "Something like that." Ezekiel folded his hands on the table. He wore black, as he always did, tailored to perfection. Beside him, Sarah looked like a dandelion that had blown in on a spring wind, chaotic, alive, determinedly cheerful. "Tell me about yourself." And she did. For the next 20 minutes, while the wine arrived and was poured, while the sun finished setting beyond the Manhattan skyline and the fairy lights strung across the rooftop terrace began to glow, Sarah talked. She was a night nurse at a hospice facility in Brooklyn, she explained, and she loved her work even though it was hard, even though she spent her shifts holding hands with people who were leaving the world rather than entering it. She had signed up for the blind date on a dare from her best friend, who insisted that Sarah's social life had died somewhere around the same time she started working exclusively overnight shifts. "I told Jamie that I have a social life, thank you very much, but apparently attending a patient's granddaughter's piano recital doesn't count." Sarah took a sip of wine, made an appreciative sound. "Okay, this is incredible. What is this?" "Barolo, from Piedmont." Ezekiel had barely touched his own glass. He did not need to drink wine, did not need to eat the food that would arrive soon, but he had learned centuries ago how to play human when necessary. Tonight felt necessary, though he could not articulate why. "Your friend was concerned for you." "Jamie's always concerned. She thinks I'm going to turn into some kind of hermit who only speaks in medical terminology and forgets how to have fun." Sarah leaned forward, chin propped on her hand. "What about you? What do you do that brings you to overpriced rooftop restaurants on a Thursday night?" "I handle acquisitions, disputes, negotiations." All true in their way. He acquired loyalty from those who owed him debts. He resolved disputes between the noble houses under his rule. He negotiated treaties that kept the fragile peace between vampires and the mortal world they moved through unseen. My work requires discretion. Mysterious. I like it. Sarah's eyes sparkled. Are you going to tell me you're secretly a spy? Or a mob boss? Oh God, please tell me you're not actually a mob boss. That would make this the worst blind date story ever. I am not a mob boss. Ezekiel felt the corner of his mouth quirk upward, a movement so unfamiliar it almost startled him. Though I imagine the organizational structures are similar. Sarah laughed again, and this time Ezekiel found himself cataloging the sound, storing it somewhere in the vast mental archives of his immortal memory. 3 tables over, the restaurant owner had been watching them, and now he made a small gesture toward the kitchen. Ezekiel caught it with peripheral vision, the way he caught everything hyper-aware, always predatory, always 3 moves ahead. So, the agency didn't tell me much about you, Sarah was saying. Just that we might be compatible based on the questionnaire. I'm guessing you also checked the box for enjoys quiet evenings and has a hard time meeting people the conventional way. Something like that. Ezekiel had never filled out a questionnaire for any matchmaking agency. He had never needed to. Companionship, when he desired it, came easily to someone with his resources, his power, his particular gravitational pull. But Sarah did not need to know that. Not yet. Perhaps not ever, if he allowed this evening to end the way it should, with a polite goodbye, a fabricated excuse about incompatibility, and Sarah returning to her life while he returned to his investigation. He did not want the evening to end. The realization struck him with the force of a revelation. He was Ezekiel Hargrave, king of the Eastern courts, arbiter of blood law, executioner of those who broke the old codes. He had watched empires rise and crumble. He had loved twice in 300 years, and both times had ended in ash and grief. He did not indulge in whimsy. He did not allow himself the luxury of distraction. And yet here he sat, listening to a human woman describe the intricacies of hospice care with a passion that made her whole face illuminate, and he wanted to keep listening, wanted to know everything, wanted to understand what kind of person chose to spend their nights easing others toward death with such tenderness. I'm talking too much, Sarah said suddenly. I always do this. Jamie says I could make friends with a brick wall if you gave me 5 minutes. I am not a brick wall. No, you're definitely not. She studied him over the rim of her wine glass, and Ezekiel felt the weight of that gaze like a physical touch. You're a very good listener, though. That's rare. You are worth listening to. The words emerged unbidden, more honest than he had intended, and Sarah blinked. Color rose in her cheeks. He could track the rush of blood beneath her skin, could hear the slight acceleration of her heartbeat. She was attracted to him. The knowledge was not surprising. Ezekiel understood the effect vampires had on humans, the magnetic pull of predator to prey, dressed up in beauty and danger. What surprised him was the answering pull he felt, the desire not to hunt but to protect, to shelter, to claim. That's possibly the nicest thing anyone's said to me in months, Sarah said softly. You're either incredibly smooth or incredibly sincere, and I honestly can't tell which. Both. Ezekiel allowed himself a small inclination of his head. They are not mutually exclusive. Dinner arrived, and with it, the owner himself, carrying plates with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. Ezekiel caught the man's eyes and held them. The message was clear. Later. First, this meal. This woman. This strange, impossible evening that felt like stepping outside of time. They ate, or rather Sarah ate, while Ezekiel moved food around his plate with the expertise of someone who had been pretending for centuries. He asked questions about her childhood in Pennsylvania, her decision to pursue nursing, her favorite patient stories, and she answered with the unguarded honesty of someone who had not yet learned that the world was full of monsters who looked like beautiful men. Mrs. Chen, Sarah said, her voice softening with memory. She was 93, and she spent her last week teaching me how to make proper dumplings, not from a recipe she didn't believe in measuring things, but by feel. She'd tap my hand when I was folding them wrong and say, "No, like love, you have to know when it's right." Sarah smiled, though her eyes were bright with unshed tears. She died holding her daughter's hand, and her last words were about hoping there would be good soup in heaven. You miss her. I miss all of them. Every single one. Sarah set down her fork. People think it must be depressing what I do, and sometimes it is, but mostly it's an honor, to be there at the end, to make sure nobody has to be afraid or alone. Ezekiel thought of the many deaths he had witnessed, the ones he had caused, the ones he had been powerless to prevent. He thought of mortality, as he always did, as something distant, something that applied to others, something that made humans precious and breakable and ultimately inconsequential in the long march of ages. But looking at Sarah, at the fierce gentleness in her expression, he understood for the first time that death was not the tragedy. Dying alone was, dying afraid was, dying without someone to bear witness to your passing, to say you mattered, you were here, you were loved. It is an honor, he agreed, and a calling that requires great strength. I don't know about strength. Stubbornness, maybe. Sarah laughed. My mom thinks I should transfer to pediatrics or something happier, but I don't know. I think I'm where I'm supposed to be. The conversation drifted, easy and meandering, through topics both profound and absurd. Sarah had opinions on everything from the best pizza in Brooklyn to the criminally underrated works of Mary Oliver to the correct way to organize a linen closet. Ezekiel discovered that he had opinions too, ones he had not examined in decades, ones that resurfaced in the warmth of her attention like spring bulbs after a long winter. It was nearly 10 when Sarah finally checked her phone and made a small sound of dismay. I have to be at work at 11. I should... She hesitated, then met his eyes with an expression that was half hopeful, half shy. This was really nice. Better than nice. Could I give you my number? Maybe we could do this again. Every rational part of Ezekiel's mind screamed that he should decline, should end this now before it became complicated, before she learned what he was and looked at him with fear instead of warmth. But rationality had never felt less compelling. I would like that very much. Sarah's face lit up with such uncomplicated joy that Ezekiel felt something in him crack open, some sealed chamber of his heart he had thought permanently closed. She scribbled her number on a cocktail napkin with a pen borrowed from the server, her handwriting looping and enthusiastic, and slid it across the table. Text me, she said. Or call, if you're one of those people who still believes in phone calls. I am exactly that sort of person. Perfect. Sarah stood, gathering her purse, and for a moment she looked uncertain. Then, in a move that was pure instinct, she leaned down and kissed his cheek. Her lips were warm, soft, achingly alive. Thank you for being wonderful, and for not making me feel like an idiot for being late. She was gone before he could respond, weaving through the tables toward the elevator, turning once to wave before she disappeared from sight. Ezekiel sat in the sudden stillness, one hand rising unbidden to touch the place where she had kissed him. Her scent lingered vanilla and antiseptic, and something uniquely her. The napkin with her number sat on the table, impossibly precious. Lord Hargrave. The restaurant owner had approached, and now he stood at a careful distance, a man who understood he was addressing judge and executioner both. Ezekiel looked up, and whatever the man saw in his face made him go even paler. Speak, Ezekiel said, his voice returning to its customary cold precision. And do not waste my time. The shipments you asked about. I swear to you, I knew nothing about what they truly were. The agency approached me, said they needed discreet meeting places for their clients, paid extremely well for the use of private rooms. I thought it was simply wealthy vampires who valued privacy. Which agency? Evermore Connections. They operate out of Soho. The man's voice shook. When I realized the humans never left the building, that they were being collected, I tried to stop it. They threatened my family. Ezekiel went very still. Evermore Connections. Yes, my lord. I have documents if you bring them to my residence tomorrow at sunset. Every paper, every communication, every name you have. Ezekiel stood, and the temperature around them seemed to drop 10 degrees. "If you have lied to me, if you have profited from this trade, I will know, and your family will find themselves without a patriarch. I swear, Lord Hargrave, I swear on my children's lives." Ezekiel believed him. 3 centuries of reading humans had given him an unerring sense for truth. He left cash on the table, far more than the meal cost, and walked to the elevator without looking back. In the car, his driver Nikolai waited, a vampire of middling age and unshakable loyalty. Nikolai took one look at Ezekiel's face and asked, "Where to, my lord?" "Home, and send someone to investigate Evermore Connections. Quietly. I want to know who runs it, who funds it, and how many humans have disappeared through their doors." "The matter from earlier?" "Yes." Ezekiel settled back against the leather seat, mind already running through possibilities, connections, threats. A matchmaking agency supplying humans to nobles. It was elegant, in a horrifying way. Humans came willingly, expecting romance, and instead found themselves traded like commodities to vampires who saw them as nothing more than food or entertainment. Sarah had used that agency. Sarah, who spent her nights comforting the dying, who folded dumplings wrong and laughed like sunlight, who had kissed his cheek and asked to see him again. The napkin with her number was in his pocket, and Ezekiel pulled it out, studying the cheerful loops of her handwriting. She had drawn a small, smiley face next to her name. She thought she had been on a date with someone that agency had selected for her, someone who had never arrived, because he had been taken. The realization crystallized with absolute certainty. Somewhere in the city, a man who had been meant to meet Sarah was missing, possibly dead, possibly worse. And Sarah had no idea how close she had come to walking into the same trap. Ezekiel pulled out his phone and typed a message. "This is Ezekiel. I hope you made it to work safely." The response came within moments. "I did. Just got here. Already smiling because tonight was so great. When can I see you again?" He stared at the screen, at the easy trust in those words, at the enthusiastic punctuation and lack of guile. She deserved the truth. She deserved to know what had happened to her intended date, what she had unwittingly escaped. She deserved to be protected from the darkness that existed in the spaces between the mortal world and his own. "Tomorrow evening," he typed. "I will pick you up at sunset. There is something we need to discuss." That sounds ominous. But okay, I'm off at 7 a.m., so I'll sleep and be ready by sunset. Fair warning, I'm less charming when I've been up all night. I doubt that very much. Her reply was another smiley face and then, "Get some sleep. I have to go hold Mrs. Patterson's hand while she tells me about her 17 grandchildren." Again, Ezekiel pocketed the phone. "Change of plans, Nikolai. I need to speak with the council. Tonight." The Council of Elders met in a mansion beneath the financial district, accessible only through tunnels that predated the subway system. Ezekiel descended into that subterranean world with the familiarity of long custom, past guards who bowed as he passed, through halls lined with tapestries that had hung in European castles before being transported to this new world. The council chamber was circular, dominated by a table carved from a single massive oak. 5 elders sat in their designated positions, vampires who had ruled their territories for centuries, who owed Ezekiel fealty but guarded their independence jealously. Lord Hargrave, Luciana Devereux, eldest among them at nearly 500 years, inclined her head. An unexpected visit. "I have discovered a trade operation." Ezekiel remained standing, a position of dominance. "Humans are being funneled to noble houses through a matchmaking agency. They arrive expecting romance. They do not leave." Silence fell, heavy and dangerous. "That is a serious accusation," said Casimir, a thin vampire with the look of a medieval scholar. "To traffic humans in such a manner violates every treaty we have established. I am aware, which is why I am bringing it to this council rather than handling it myself." Ezekiel placed his hands on the table, leaning forward. "I want names. Who is purchasing these humans? Who is facilitating the trade? And I want it stopped, immediately. with appropriate consequences for everyone involved. "You speak as though we condone such things," Luciana said, her voice sharp as cut glass. "I speak as though I do not yet know who to trust." Ezekiel met her eyes without flinching. "Someone is profiting from this trade. Someone with enough power to operate openly, to threaten business owners, to believe themselves untouchable. If it is one of you, confess now. My mercy has limits, but it exists. My vengeance does not. It is not any of us." This from Sebastian, who governed the artistic vampires of Greenwich Village and Soho. "But I may know who it is. There have been rumors of Lord Thaddeus expanding his appetites." Thaddeus, one of the noble houses, old money, older still in vampire years, a creature who had been ancient when Ezekiel was newly turned, who considered himself above the laws that governed lesser beings. Thaddeus. Ezekiel tasted the name like poison. "You have proof?" Whispers. Nothing concrete. But his household has been entertaining far more frequently than usual, and the guests who arrive do not appear to leave. Sebastian spread his pale hands. "I assumed it was none of my concern. It is now everyone's concern." Ezekiel straightened. "I am declaring an inquiry. Every noble house will open its doors to inspection. Any human found held against their will is to be released immediately and compensated appropriately. Any vampire found participating in this trade will face execution." "You cannot execute a Lord of Thaddeus's standing without a trial," Casimir protested. "Then we will have a trial, a public one. Let every vampire in the eastern courts see what happens to those who violate our laws." Ezekiel's voice could have frozen blood. "We exist in the margins of the human world because we have agreed to certain rules. We do not hunt indiscriminately. We do not traffic. We do not draw attention. Whoever is behind this has risked exposure for all of us, and that I will not tolerate." The council members exchanged glances, the silent communication of immortals who had worked together for centuries. "We support your inquiry," Luciana said finally. "But tread carefully, Ezekiel. Thaddeus has allies, and not all of them sit at this table. Then they can stand with him when he falls." Ezekiel left the mansion as the city above settled into its post-midnight rhythm. He had hours before dawn, and he used them to visit Evermore Connections personally. The building was locked, dark, unremarkable except for the faint scent of vampire magic that clung to its threshold. He could break in easily, but that would alert whoever ran this operation. Better to investigate properly with Sarah's help. The thought stopped him on the sidewalk. Sarah's help. He should not involve her. This was dangerous, potentially deadly, and she was human, fragile, mortal, breakable. Everything in him that had been honed by 3 centuries of rule said to handle this alone, to keep her far away from the darkness. But she had spoken of her patients with such fierce love, such determination that they not face their ends alone. She understood hard things. She sat with them. She did not flinch. And more than that, she deserved to know. Her intended date was missing because of this agency. She had a right to understand what had nearly happened to her. He would tell her. Everything. The truth of what he was, the danger she had unknowingly escaped, the investigation that was now underway. He would give her the choice to walk away or to help, and he would respect whatever she decided. The resolution settled into his bones with the weight of an oath. Dawn was approaching when he finally returned to his penthouse, a sprawling space of dark wood and darker stone that overlooked the East River. Nikolai had left a folder on his desk, preliminary findings about Evermore Connections. Ezekiel read through them as the sky began to pale beyond his blackout curtains. The agency was owned by a shell corporation, but the name on the business license was familiar. Marcus Thorne. Human. No apparent connection to the vampire world, but the address listed was in a building owned by Thaddeus's holding company, Thorne, the same last name as Sarah. Ezekiel went very still. It could be coincidence. Thorne was not an uncommon surname, but in his experience, coincidences were rarely innocent. He reached for his phone, then stopped. It was nearly 6 in the morning. Sarah would be finishing her shift, exhausted, expecting to go home and sleep before their evening meeting. He could not call her now with questions about whether she had a relative named Marcus, whether she knew anything about Evermore connections. Instead, he sent a single message. Sleep well. I will collect you at 8 this evening. Send me your address. Her response came an hour later, as the sun climbed above the horizon, and Ezekiel retreated to the windowless bedroom where he would spend the daylight hours. Brooklyn address attached. Can't wait. Today's going to be the longest sleep of my life. Ezekiel lay in the darkness, perfectly still in the way of vampires during daylight, and thought about the woman who had stumbled into his life by mistake. The woman who might be connected to this investigation in ways neither of them yet understood. The woman who had made him want to be human for 2 hours, who had kissed his cheek and left him feeling more alive than he had in decades. He would protect her. Whatever came next, whatever truths emerged, whatever dangers lurked in the spaces between their worlds, he would keep her safe. It was a promise he made to himself, there in the dark, and Ezekiel Hargrave did not make promises lightly. The day passed in the strange suspended animation of vampire sleep, and when Ezekiel woke at sunset, his first thought was of Sarah. He dressed with unusual care, selecting a dark gray shirt and black jacket, and instructed Nikolai to bring the car around. The drive to Brooklyn took 40 minutes through evening traffic. Sarah's building was a walk-up in a neighborhood that hovered between gentrification and its working-class roots, the kind of place where bodegas stood next to artisanal coffee shops. Ezekiel climbed to the 3rd floor and knocked on apartment 3C. Sarah opened the door, and the sight of her drove the breath from his lungs, an unnecessary action he had not bothered with in years. She wore jeans and a soft sweater the color of autumn leaves, her curls loose around her shoulders, and she looked both rested and nervous. "Hi," she said, and then with a slight laugh, "I was going to play it cool, but I've been watching the door for 20 minutes, so that ship has sailed. I appreciate honesty over pretense." Ezekiel stepped inside when she gestured, taking in the small apartment with its mismatched furniture, its overflowing bookshelves, its general air of organized chaos. It was warm, lived in, human in a way his penthouse could never be. "Your home is lovely. It's a shoebox with delusions of grandeur, but it's mine." Sarah grabbed a jacket from the back of a chair. "So where are we going? Should I have dressed up? You look very—" She gestured at him, seemingly at a loss. "Very you, which is intimidatingly put together. You look perfect." The words came out rougher than he intended, weighted with too much truth. "But we are not going out. Not yet. First we need to talk." Sarah's expression shifted, humor giving way to concern. "Okay, that sounds serious." "It is." Ezekiel moved to the window, looking out at the street below, gathering his thoughts. 300 years, and he had never been nervous about a conversation. "Sarah, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting. Can you do that?" "You're married." She said it flatly, already bracing for disappointment. "Or engaged. Or you're actually a mob boss and last night was you casing the restaurant before a hit." Despite everything, Ezekiel felt his mouth curve. "None of those things. But what I am is complicated." He turned to face her, and in the lamplight of her small apartment, he let her see him clearly, the unnatural pallor of his skin, the silver white of his hair, the stillness that marked him as something other than human. He watched comprehension flicker across her face, watched the instinctive step backward, the widening of her eyes. "I am a vampire," he said quietly. "And last night, you were not sitting with your blind date. You were sitting with me because your actual date never arrived. I believe he was taken by the same agency that arranged your meeting." Sarah stared at him. Her heartbeat, which Ezekiel could hear as clearly as thunder, accelerated sharply, but she did not run, did not scream, did not faint. Instead, she sank slowly onto her couch, eyes never leaving his face. "You're serious?" "Completely." "Vampires are real." "Yes. And you're one of them. The king of the Eastern courts, to be precise. I rule every vampire from Maine to Virginia." Ezekiel remained by the window, giving her space. "Last night, I came to that restaurant to question the owner about suspicious activity. You sat down and mistook me for someone else, and I allowed it because—" He paused, choosing his words with care. "Because you were extraordinary, and I was selfish." Sarah's hands were shaking slightly. She clasped them together in her lap. "My date. You think something happened to him. I am almost certain of it. The agency you used, Evermore Connections, is a front for human trafficking. Vampires who have no regard for our laws pay to have humans delivered to them under the guise of matchmaking. The humans arrive willingly, expecting romance, and are never seen again." "Oh my God." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "His name was David. David Chen. He was a teacher. We'd been messaging for a week. I am sorry. Are you going to—" She swallowed hard. "Are you going to do the same thing to me? Is that why you're here?" The question cut deeper than any blade. Ezekiel crossed the room and knelt before her, bringing himself to eye level, letting her see every ounce of sincerity in his expression. "No, never. I would tear apart anyone who tried to harm you. I am here because you deserve the truth, because you were placed in danger without your knowledge, and because I—" He stopped, the words catching in his throat. "Because in one evening you made me remember what it felt like to be human, and I find I do not want to let you go." Sarah searched his face, her own expression a tumult of fear and confusion, and something that might have been hope. "How do I know you're telling the truth? How do I know this isn't just another version of the same trap?" "You do not. You have only my word and the evidence I can provide." Ezekiel did not move, did not touch her, though every instinct screamed to reach for her hand, to offer comfort. "I am investigating this trafficking operation. I plan to dismantle it completely, to find every human who has been taken and return them to safety if possible. I would like your help, but only if you choose freely. If you want me to leave and never contact you again, I will respect that choice." "My help? I'm a nurse, not a detective. What could I possibly—" "You use the agency. You have access to their systems, their communications. More than that, you understand humans in a way I never could. You know how to talk to them, how to comfort them, how to earn trust." Ezekiel held her gaze. "The humans we find will be traumatized, terrified. They will need someone who can help them through that fear. They will need you." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her teeth worrying at her lower lip. Then she said, "Prove it." "Prove what?" "That you're a vampire, that this isn't some elaborate delusion or prank." Her chin lifted, and Ezekiel saw the steel beneath her gentle exterior. "If you want me to believe you, to help you, show me." It was a fair request. Ezekiel stood and, with deliberate slowness, crossed to her kitchen. He picked up a knife from the dish drainer, a simple paring knife, and drew it across his palm. Blood welled, dark and rich, and Sarah made a small sound of alarm. "Wait!" But she fell silent as the wound closed before her eyes, flesh knitting back together in seconds until no trace of the cut remained. Ezekiel set down the knife and returned to her, holding out his unmarked palm. "We heal almost instantaneously from most wounds. We do not age. We are stronger and faster than humans, and we require blood to survive, though many of us have learned to subsist on animal blood or blood bank donations rather than hunting." He lowered his hand. "We are vulnerable to sunlight, which will kill us slowly and painfully. We can be killed by decapitation or by having our hearts destroyed. We are not monsters from stories, but we are not human either. We are something in between." Sarah reached out tentatively and touched his hand, her fingers tracing the place where the wound had been. Her touch was warm, electric, and Ezekiel held perfectly still, afraid to move and break the fragile moment. "You're so cold," she whispered. "We do not generate body heat the way you do." "And you really want my help? You're not just saying that to, I don't know, make me feel useful before you eat me or whatever?" "I do not eat people. And yes, I truly want your help." Ezekiel turned his hand over, catching her fingers gently in his. "But more than that, I want you to be safe. If you choose not to involve yourself in this investigation, I will ensure that the agency removes your information from their files, that you are never contacted again, that you can return to your life without fear. Your safety matters more to me than your assistance." "Why?" The question was small, vulnerable. You don't even know me. I know that you spend your nights holding the hands of the dying. I know that you make friends with brick walls and laugh like sunshine and learn to fold dumplings by feel because a patient wanted to teach you." Ezekiel lifted her hand, and in a gesture that was pure instinct, pressed it to his chest where his heart beat slow and steady. "I know that one evening in your company made me feel more alive than I have in decades, and I know that I will not allow harm to come to you, whether you help me or not." Tears gathered in Sarah's eyes, though she blinked them back fiercely. "This is insane. Vampires are real. My blind date was kidnapped, and the impossibly beautiful man I had dinner with last night is apparently vampire royalty who wants to rescue trafficking victims and needs my help to do it." When you summarize it that way, it does sound rather absurd. "And yet, I believe you," Sarah laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. "I must be out of my mind, but I believe you. Maybe because my job has taught me that the world has more strange and terrible things in it than most people want to acknowledge, or maybe because—" She met his eyes. "Because I felt something last night, something real. And I don't think you're lying to me, even if everything you're saying is impossible." "Then you will help?" "I'll help. But I have conditions." Sarah pulled her hand back, and Ezekiel immediately missed the warmth of her touch. "First, you tell me everything. No more secrets, no protecting me by keeping me in the dark. If I'm doing this, I need all the information." "Agreed." "Second, if we find David or any of the others alive, they get real help. Therapy, support, whatever they need to recover. Not just a pat on the head and a bus ticket home. I will personally ensure they receive every resource available." "And third," Sarah's voice softened, "you have to promise me that when this is over, when we've stopped these people and helped the victims, you'll take me on a real date. One where we both know who the other is from the start." Something in Ezekiel's chest expanded, a feeling he had thought long dead. "I promise." "Okay then." Sarah stood, squaring her shoulders with visible determination. "Where do we start?" They started with the agency. Sarah pulled up her laptop and logged into the Evermore Connections portal, showing Ezekiel the sleek interface, the questionnaire she had filled out, the profile that had been created for her. Ezekiel studied the information with growing coldness. "The questions?" he said, pointing to the screen. "They are designed to identify isolation. Do you have close family nearby? Do you work nights or weekends? Would your friends notice if you missed a social event? They are selecting for people who would not be immediately missed." "Oh God." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "I answered yes to all of those. I work nights, my family is in Pennsylvania, and my only close friend is Jamie, who travels constantly for work. You would have been a perfect target." Ezekiel's voice was flat, dangerous. "Check your messages. See if David sent anything the day you were supposed to meet." Sarah clicked through to her message history. The last message from David Chen had been sent at 7:45 p.m. the night before, 15 minutes before Sarah had arrived at the restaurant. "Running late, but definitely still coming. Can't wait to finally meet you." He never made it. Sarah's voice shook. He was taken somewhere between sending this and getting to the restaurant. Which means they intercepted him in transit. Planned, coordinated, professional. Ezekiel pulled out his phone and forwarded the information to Nikolai with terse instructions. "My people will trace his last known location, check traffic cameras, look for any sign of where he was taken. In the meantime, we need to visit the agency in person. Now, the offices are closed, which makes it the perfect time." Ezekiel stood, offering his hand. "Unless you would prefer to wait until morning?" Sarah looked at his outstretched hand, then up at his face. Whatever she saw there must have reassured her, because she placed her palm in his and let him help her to her feet. "Let's go. I don't think I could sleep right now anyway." The drive into Soho was quiet. Sarah pressed against the window of the town car, watching the city slide past with wide eyes. Nikolai drove with the preternatural smoothness of a vampire, navigating traffic as though he could predict every movement before it happened, which, given vampire reflexes, he essentially could. "Nikolai," Sarah said suddenly. "Is he also—" "A vampire, yes. He has served my household for nearly a century." "A century." Sarah shook her head slowly. I can't even imagine. What's it like, living that long? Lonely, Ezekiel said, the word escaping before he could consider it. You watch everyone you care about age and die. You see civilizations rise and fall. After a while, it becomes easier to simply not form attachments, to exist rather than live. That sounds horrible. It is, or it was. He met her eyes in the dim interior of the car. You asked me last night what I do. The truth is that I govern. I make laws, settle disputes, ensure that vampires do not expose themselves to the human world or prey upon it too freely. I have not been a man in a very long time, Sarah. I have been a king, a judge, an executioner. But last night, sitting across from you, listening to you talk about dumplings and piano recitals and the correct way to organize linen closets last night, I was simply Ezekiel, and I had forgotten how much I missed that. Sarah was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. Then she said, I'm glad that you got to be just Ezekiel, even if it started with me being completely embarrassing and sitting down at the wrong table. It was not the wrong table, it was precisely the right one. They arrived at the Evermore Connections building just after 9. The first floor was dark, but Ezekiel could sense the faint vibration of electricity humming through the upper floors. Someone was there, or had been recently. He circled the building once, Sarah following close behind, until he found a service entrance. Stay behind me, he murmured, and before Sarah could respond, he had wrenched the door open with enough force to snap the lock. The sound was shockingly loud in the quiet street, but no alarm sounded. Ezekiel gestured for her to follow and stepped into the darkness beyond. The building smelled of stale coffee and printer ink and, beneath it all, fear. Ezekiel's nostrils flared as he tracked the scent to the 3rd floor, where Evermore Connections occupied a suite of offices behind frosted glass doors. Those doors, too, yielded to his strength. Inside, the offices were sterile, modern, indistinguishable from 1,000 other corporate spaces. Rows of desks, filing cabinets, motivational posters about success and connection. Ezekiel moved through the space with purpose, opening drawers, examining papers, while Sarah went directly to the nearest computer and powered it on. What are you looking for? She asked, fingers already flying over the keyboard. Financial records, names of anyone who has paid for their services, physical addresses of properties they use. Ezekiel opened a filing cabinet and found it full of manila folders, each labeled with a name and date. He pulled one at random. Jennifer Martinez, 28, taken 3 months prior. There was a photo, a copy of her questionnaire, and a handwritten note. Delivered to Lord Thaddeus, compensation received. His vision went red at the edges. He forced himself to breathe, to focus, and pulled more folders. Dozens of them. Hundreds, perhaps. Years of operation. Victims catalogued like inventory. Ezekiel. Sarah's voice was tight. You need to see this. He crossed to her desk and looked over her shoulder at the screen. She had accessed the agency's client database, not the one potential matches saw, but the internal system. Names, addresses, preferences, and beside each human profile was a notation. Status, delivered, or status, pending, or status, eliminated, unsuitable. Eliminated, Sarah whispered. What does that mean? It means they killed them. Ezekiel's hands clenched into fists. If someone was not deemed suitable for sale, they were removed. Sarah's face had gone pale, but her hand stayed steady on the keyboard. I'm going to download everything, all of it, every file, every record. We'll need evidence for whatever comes next. While she worked, Ezekiel continued searching. In the back office, behind a desk that likely belonged to whoever ran this operation, he found a ledger. Not digital, but physical, old-fashioned, handwritten, the kind of record-keeping that could not be hacked or traced. He flipped through pages of transactions, each one noting a human's name, the noble house that had purchased them, and the price paid. Not money, he realized. Favors, votes in council meetings, territory concessions, political power. This is how Thaddeus has been consolidating control, Ezekiel said aloud. He offers humans to nobles who want them, and in exchange, they support his agenda. That's monstrous. Sarah was inserting a flash drive into the computer, her jaw set in a hard line. These are people. We have families, lives, dreams. We're not bargaining chips. I know. Ezekiel placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling her warmth through the thin fabric of her sweater. And I promise you, everyone involved in this will answer for what they have done. The download finished, and Sarah pocketed the flash drive. They were about to leave when Ezekiel heard it, the whisper of movement in the stairwell, the nearly silent tread of someone trying to be stealthy. He moved between Sarah and the door instantly, a low growl building in his chest. We have company. The door burst open and 3 vampires entered. They were young by immortal standards, perhaps a century or less, and they carried themselves with the cocky assurance of those who believed themselves untouchable. The one in front, a blonde woman with a smile like broken glass, stopped short when she saw Ezekiel. Lord Hargrave. The smile did not waver. I did not expect to see you here. Clearly. Who sent you? We are simply checking on our investment. This agency belongs to our master, and he does not appreciate thieves. The vampire's eyes slid past Ezekiel to Sarah, and her expression brightened with predatory interest. Or trespassers, though I must say, you have brought us a lovely gift. How thoughtful. Ezekiel's power filled the room like a pressure wave, driving the 3 vampires to their knees with its weight. You will not touch her. You will not look at her. You will answer my questions, and then you will return to Thaddeus and deliver a message. The blonde vampire's face contorted with effort as she fought against the compulsion of his authority. Ezekiel was older, stronger, and infinitely more powerful. She did not stand a chance. What? Message? She gritted out. Tell Thaddeus that his operation is finished. Tell him that every human he has taken will be returned, and every vampire who participated will face trial. Tell him that if he runs, I will hunt him to the ends of the earth, and when I find him, his death will be neither quick nor painless. Ezekiel's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow filled every corner of the room. And tell him that if he sends anyone after the woman with me, I will consider it an act of war, and I will burn his house to foundations and salt the earth where it stood. The 3 vampires scrambled backward, terror finally breaking through their bravado. They fled without another word, and Ezekiel listened to their retreat down the stairs, out into the street, until they were blocks away. Only then did he turn to Sarah, who stood with her back pressed against the desk, eyes huge. Are you all right? He asked. They were on their knees and you didn't even touch them. How? Age brings power. I am much older than they are, and I am king. My authority is absolute over those who have sworn fealty. Ezekiel gentled his voice, aware that he must seem terrifying to her right now. I am sorry you had to see that. Don't be sorry. Sarah let out a shaky breath. That was incredible and terrifying and kind of hot, if I'm being honest, which I probably shouldn't be given the circumstances. Despite everything, Ezekiel laughed. You are extraordinary. I'm really not. I'm just a nurse who's in way over her head and apparently has terrible taste in men, since I'm wildly attracted to a vampire king who just threatened to burn someone's house down for me. Sarah pushed away from the desk, legs slightly unsteady. But we got what we came for, right? The evidence? Yes. More than enough to convict everyone involved. Ezekiel held out his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Sarah took it, letting him guide her out of the office and back down to the street where Nikolai waited with the car. In the safety of the back seat, Sarah finally seemed to process what had happened. She was shaking, adrenaline crashing through her system, and Ezekiel pulled her against his side without thinking. She came willingly, tucking herself against him, her head on his shoulder. We have to find them, she said into the silence. David and all the others. We have to get them back. We will. I have already called an emergency council session for tomorrow night. I will present the evidence, and we will coordinate raids on every property associated with Thaddeus and his allies. Ezekiel stroked her hair, the gesture soothing to them both. Many of them may already be dead, Sarah. You need to prepare yourself for that. I know. I see death every day. But I have to hope, you know? I have to believe that at least some of them are still out there waiting for someone to come for them. Then we will hope together. They drove in silence back to Sarah's apartment. At her door, she turned to face him, and Ezekiel saw the exhaustion in every line of her body. She had been awake for over 24 hours, had learned that vampires were real, had narrowly avoided being killed by 3 of them, and had downloaded evidence that would topple a conspiracy centuries in the making. She should have been terrified, should have been ordering him out of her life. Instead, she rose on her toes and kissed him. It was not the chaste brush of lips from the restaurant. This was need and relief, and the desperate affirmation of being alive. Ezekiel froze for a heartbeat, and then his arms came around her, pulling her close, and he was kissing her back with 300 years of loneliness and longing pouring through him. She tasted like coffee and hope, and Ezekiel wanted to drown in her. Wanted to forget the investigation, the council, the weight of his crown. Wanted to be nothing more than a man holding a woman he was falling catastrophically in love with. Sarah pulled back first, breathless, her eyes bright. I needed to do that. In case something happens tomorrow, I needed you to know. Nothing will happen to you. I will not allow it. You can't control everything, Ezekiel. Even vampire kings must have limits. Perhaps, but my limits are so far beyond anything that threatens you that they might as well not exist. He cupped her face in his hands, memorizing every detail. Sleep. I will return tomorrow evening, and together we will end this. Be careful, please. Always. He waited until she was safely inside before returning to the car. Nikolai, who had been discreetly facing forward, met his eyes in the rearview mirror. She is brave, the driver said, and she cares for you. I know. Ezekiel touched his lips, where the warmth of her kiss still lingered. Which is why we must ensure she survives what comes next. The council met the following night in an emergency session, every elder present along with representatives from the major noble houses. Ezekiel arrived early and placed the ledger, the folders, and the flash drive containing the digital records on the table. When Thaddeus entered, flanked by his personal guard, Ezekiel felt the predator in him rise. Thaddeus was ancient, elegant, with the bearing of someone who had been nobility even in his human life. He wore his arrogance like a cloak. This is highly irregular, Lord Hargrave, to call an emergency session without stating the cause. The cause, Ezekiel said, his voice cutting through the murmur of conversation, is that you have been trafficking humans for profit and political gain in direct violation of every treaty and law that governs our kind. The room went silent. Thaddeus laughed, the sound rich with amusement. That is quite an accusation. I assume you have proof? Extensive proof. Ezekiel gestured to the evidence laid out before him. Financial records detailing every transaction, files on every human you have taken, testimony from those you threatened into cooperation. And he looked directly at Thaddeus. The cooperation of 3 of your own people, who were most forthcoming once they realized the extent of their legal exposure. The vampires who had confronted them at the agency had, as Ezekiel predicted, turned on their master the moment they understood that loyalty would cost them their lives. They had provided names, locations, details of the entire operation in exchange for clemency. Thaddeus's expression hardened. Those records prove nothing. They could have been fabricated. Then you will not object to opening your properties for inspection? Luciana's voice was cold. If you have nothing to hide, surely you can allow the council to verify Lord Hargrave's claims. I object on principle. My privacy, your privacy, is forfeit the moment you endangered all of us. Sebastian leaned forward, fury in every line of his body. Do you have any idea what would happen if the human world discovered what you have been doing? They would hunt us, all of us. You have risked exposure for personal gain, and that, Thaddeus, is unforgivable. The vote was called, and it was unanimous. Thaddeus's properties would be searched immediately, and if humans were found held against their will, he would face trial for crimes against the covenant that bound their kind. Ezekiel led the raid himself, bringing 20 of his most trusted vampires to the estate Thaddeus maintained in Westchester. It was a sprawling mansion hidden behind gates and walls, the kind of place that existed in plain sight, unremarkable to passing humans. They found the humans in the basement, 17 of them, held in cells that had been disguised as wine storage. 17 humans in various states of trauma, some barely conscious, all malnourished and terrified. Ezekiel forced himself to remain calm, to be the king they needed, even as rage threatened to consume him. He called Sarah. She arrived within the hour, having somehow convinced Nikolai to drive at speeds that defied traffic laws. When she saw the humans being brought out into the night air, wrapped in blankets, their eyes huge and haunted, she went directly to them without hesitation. Ezekiel watched as she knelt beside a young woman who was sobbing uncontrollably, watched as she took the woman's hand and spoke in low, gentle tones, watched as she became exactly what these people needed, a human face, a kind voice, proof that they were not alone. "You are safe now," Sarah said over and over. "You are safe, and we are going to take care of you. I promise." One of the humans was David Chen. He was gaunt, shaking, but alive. When he saw Sarah, recognition flickered across his face. "You," he whispered, "we were supposed to have dinner." "I know. I'm so sorry this happened to you." Sarah's voice broke, but she did not look away. "But you're safe now. We're going to get you help, real help, I promise." Medical personnel arrived, human doctors that Ezekiel had on retainer for situations exactly like this, professionals who knew about vampires and had signed extensive non-disclosure agreements. They began assessing the victims, providing immediate care, arranging transport to a private facility where they could recover away from the public eye. Sarah worked alongside them for hours, her nursing training taking over. She started IVs, assessed injuries, offered comfort to those who would accept it. And through it all, Ezekiel stayed close, ensuring her safety, watching her transform grief and horror into action. It was nearly dawn when the last of the victims had been transported to safety. Sarah stood in the empty basement, looking at the cells, her face streaked with tears she had not allowed herself to cry in front of the survivors. 17, she said hoarsely. 17 people, and those are just the ones who were still alive. "I know." Ezekiel came to stand beside her. "There will be more. We have a list of properties to search, and we will find everyone we can." "And Thaddeus? What happens to him?" "He will stand trial. And when he is found guilty, and he will be executed." Ezekiel's voice was flat, final. "I will carry out the sentence myself." Sarah turned to him, and in her eyes he saw not fear, but understanding. "Good." They returned to the city as the sky began to pale, Ezekiel driving himself in one of the confiscated cars, while Sarah dozed in the passenger seat, exhausted beyond measure. He carried her up to her apartment and laid her gently on her bed, pulling a blanket over her sleeping form. He should have left. Dawn was coming, and he needed to retreat to his own home, his own safety. But instead, he found himself lingering, memorizing the peaceful lines of her face, the way her curls spread across the pillow. "Stay." Her voice was sleepy, barely audible. "I know you can't be in the sun, but stay until you have to go. Please." So he stayed, sitting beside her bed in the slowly lightening room, and when the sun finally crested the horizon and he could feel its killing light pressing against the windows, he leaned down and kissed her forehead. "I will return at sunset," he promised. She smiled without opening her eyes. "I know." The trial of Lord Thaddeus took 3 nights and involved testimony from victims, evidence presented in exhaustive detail, and the damning ledger that proved not only his guilt, but the complicity of 17 other noble vampires who had participated in the trade. All were found guilty. All were sentenced to death. Ezekiel carried out the sentences in the traditional manner, beheading by silver blade, performed in the council chamber while every vampire of significance watched. It was brutal, necessary, and sent a message that reverberated through every court in the country. The laws applied to everyone, regardless of age or status or power. When it was finished, when the last head had rolled and the chamber had been cleared, Ezekiel stood alone in the empty room and felt the weight of 300 years pressing down on him. He had been king for so long, had made so many impossible choices, had sacrificed so much in the name of duty and law. He was tired. Ezekiel. He turned to find Sarah in the doorway. She had witnessed the executions, had insisted on it, saying the victims deserved to know justice had been served, and though her face was pale, her eyes were clear. "It is finished," he said. "I know. I wanted to make sure you were all right. I have executed criminals before. This was no different. Liar." She crossed the room to him, and Ezekiel found himself reaching for her without thought, pulling her into his arms. She came willingly, wrapping herself around him, and for a long moment they simply held each other. "I am tired, Sarah," he admitted into her hair. "I am so very tired of being king, of making these choices, of standing alone in rooms like this and wondering if it ever truly matters." "It matters. You saved those people. You stopped something terrible. That matters." "Does it? There will be others. There are always others. For every conspiracy I uncover, every law I enforce, 10 more are waiting. I am fighting a tide that never stops, and He stopped, the confession too raw. "I do not want to do this anymore." Sarah pulled back enough to look up at him. "Then don't. I am king. I cannot simply walk away." "Why not? Appoint a successor. Set up a council to govern in your place. There are options, Ezekiel. There are always options if you are willing to consider them." He stared at her, the idea so foreign it had never even occurred to him. Walk away. Abdicate. Choose his own happiness over duty for the first time in 3 centuries. "They would never accept it," he said slowly. "The council, the nobles, they would see it as weakness." "Then let them. You have given them 300 years. I think you have earned the right to choose yourself for once." Sarah cupped his face in her hands, her touch warm and grounding. "I'm not saying you have to decide now. But think about it. Really think about what you want, not what you think you are supposed to want." What did he want? The answer came with startling clarity. He wanted her. He wanted nights spent in her small apartment, listening to her talk about her patients. He wanted to help with her work, to use his resources to make her dream of a nightside clinic a reality. He wanted to be Ezekiel, just Ezekiel, not Lord Hargrave, not the king of the Eastern courts, not the arbiter of blood law. He wanted a life. "I will think about it," he promised. "Good." She kissed him, soft and sweet, and then stepped back. "Now come on. We have work to do." "Work?" "The survivors. They need support systems, therapy, safe places to stay while they readjust. I've been making lists." She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket, covered in her looping handwriting. "I was thinking we could set up a foundation, something dedicated to helping people who have been victimized by the supernatural world. Counseling, medical care, legal assistance, all of it confidential and free." Ezekiel took the paper, scanning her notes. She had thought of everything: funding structures, staffing needs, security protocols. It was ambitious, compassionate, and entirely like her. "I will provide whatever resources you need," he said. "Money, property, personnel, all of it." "I was hoping you'd say that." Sarah grinned. "Because I may have already put a deposit down on a building in Brooklyn. It used to be a community center, and it's perfect for what we need. We can set up counseling rooms, medical facilities, even temporary housing for people who need it." "You are remarkable." "I'm practical, and I refuse to let those people suffer any more than they already have." Her expression sobered. "David's going to be okay, I think. He's resilient. But some of the others, they are going to need long-term support. Years of it, maybe. I want to make sure they have that." Over the following weeks, Sarah's foundation took shape. Ezekiel provided the funding anonymously, through shell corporations that could not be traced back to the vampire world. Sarah recruited staff, trained volunteers, and personally oversaw every aspect of the operation with a dedication that left him in awe. The survivors began to heal. Slowly, painfully, but heal nonetheless. David Chen returned to teaching, though he now also volunteered at the foundation, helping other victims process their trauma. Others found their own paths forward, supported by the resources Sarah had built for them. And through it all, Ezekiel and Sarah grew closer. He told her stories of his long life, the wonders he had seen, and the sorrows he had endured. She introduced him to the small pleasures of mortality pizza at 2 a.m, terrible reality television, the satisfaction of helping someone through a hard night. They did not speak of the future, of what it meant that she was human and aging while he remained frozen in time. Ezekiel did not want to think about the inevitable end, the moment when he would lose her the way he had lost everyone else he had ever cared for. But Sarah, as always, forced the conversation. It was 3 months after the trial and they were in her apartment. Sarah curled against his side on the couch while rain drummed against the windows. She had been quiet for most of the evening, and Ezekiel had learned to recognize that particular quality of silence. It meant she was building up to something important. "I don't want to be turned," she said finally. Ezekiel went still. "I have not asked. I know, but I wanted to say it before you did, before it became this unspoken thing between us." She sat up, turning to face him. "I know what I am to you. I know you care about me, maybe even love me. And I know that eventually you are going to have to watch me get old and die, and that is going to hurt. But I can't become a vampire, Ezekiel. I can't give up my humanity. I would never ask you to. Wouldn't you, eventually?" Her eyes searched his face. "When I start to age, when you realize how little time we have left, won't you be tempted to offer?" He wanted to lie, to reassure her. But she deserved honesty. "Perhaps. But I would respect your choice, whatever it was. I need you to understand why." Sarah took his hands in hers. "My work, what I do with the dying, the comfort I provide, that comes from understanding mortality, from knowing that life is finite and precious because it ends. If I became immortal, I would lose that. I would lose the ability to truly connect with the people I help. And I can't. I won't give that up, not even for more time with you." Ezekiel closed his eyes, absorbing the pain of her words and the beauty of them. She was choosing her calling over him, and he could not fault her for it. It was what made her extraordinary in the first place. "I understand," he said quietly, "and I love you all the more for it." "You love me?" Her voice was small, hopeful. "Desperately, completely, with every part of me that remembers how to feel." He opened his eyes and met her gaze. "I love you, Seraphina Thorne, and I will love you for whatever time we have, whether it is 50 years or 5. And when you are gone, I will carry you with me for the rest of my immortal life." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "That's the most romantic and heartbreaking thing anyone has ever said to me." "It is only the truth." She kissed him then, deep and desperate, and Ezekiel kissed her back with everything he had, everything he was. They made love that night with the urgency of people who understood how precious and fleeting time truly was, and afterward, lying tangled together in her small bed, Ezekiel made a decision. The next evening he called a council meeting. "I am abdicating," he announced without preamble. "Effective immediately, I am stepping down as king of the Eastern courts." The silence that followed was deafening. "You cannot be serious," Luciana said finally. "Ezekiel, you have ruled for 3 centuries. You are the foundation upon which our stability rests. And I am tired. I have given you 300 years of my life, and I want what remains of it for myself." He looked around the table, meeting each elder's eyes in turn. "I propose a governing council to replace me 5 members elected from the noble houses serving 10-year terms. No single king, but a collective leadership that prevents the kind of power consolidation we just witnessed with Thaddeus." "This is madness," Casimir protested. "The courts need a strong hand. The courts need justice and stability. which a council can provide as well as any king. Better perhaps, since power will be distributed rather than concentrated. Ezekiel stood, signaling the end of the discussion. I am not asking your permission. I am informing you of my decision. You have 1 week to select the first council. I will assist with the transition, and then I am done. He left the chamber before anyone could respond and found Sarah waiting outside. She must have seen something in his face because she smiled. You did it. I did. I am no longer king. The words felt strange, liberating. I am simply Ezekiel. And what will simply Ezekiel do with his newfound freedom? I thought perhaps I might help a certain hospice nurse with her foundation. I understand she needs someone with extensive organizational experience and deep pockets. He drew her close. And in the evenings, I thought I might court her properly. Take her to dinner at restaurants where she is actually supposed to meet me. Perhaps even convince her to move into a larger apartment, one with space for 2. That sounds perfect. Sarah laid her head against his chest. Absolutely perfect. The transition took 6 months. Ezekiel trained the new council, transferred his holdings, and slowly divested himself of the power he had carried for so long. It was harder than he had expected. 3 centuries of habit did not disappear overnight, but every time doubt crept in, he would think of Sarah, of the life they could build together, and the choice became easy. When it was finally done, when the last document had been signed and the last responsibility transferred, Ezekiel walked out of the council chamber and did not look back. Sarah was waiting at her foundation's new location, a converted brownstone in Brooklyn that housed counseling rooms, medical facilities, and a small apartment on the top floor where she had moved her things. Their things now, since Ezekiel had officially taken up residence there as well. How does it feel? She asked when he arrived. Terrifying, exhilarating. Right. He pulled her into his arms. How was your day? Good. We had 3 new clients and David led a group session that went really well. Oh, and I got the permits approved for the Nightside Clinic. The Nightside Clinic had been Sarah's dream for years, a medical facility that operated exclusively overnight, providing care for people who worked night shifts, who were homeless and moved through the city after dark, who for whatever reason could not access traditional health care. Ezekiel had made it his personal mission to ensure it became a reality. When do we open? 2 months if the renovations stay on schedule. Sarah grinned. I'm going to need to hire more nurses, and we'll need someone to handle logistics, supply orders, all the boring administrative stuff. I suppose I could assist with that. I find myself with a great deal of free time these days. They fell into a routine. Sarah worked nights at the hospice, and Ezekiel managed the foundation and the clinic, using his centuries of experience to build systems that would serve people who had been failed by every other system. They worked together with a synchronicity that felt effortless. 2 people who had found their purpose in each other and in the work they shared. 2 years after they met, the Nightside Clinic opened its doors. Sarah stood in the lobby at midnight, watching as the first patients trickled in: a construction worker with a broken finger, a homeless woman seeking treatment for pneumonia, a night shift security guard who needed his blood pressure medication refilled. This is incredible, she whispered to Ezekiel. Look at them. Look at how many people needed this. You did this. You saw a need and filled it. Ezekiel watched her face, the joy and pride there, and felt his heart expand. I am so proud of you. We did this, you and me together. She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. I couldn't have done any of it without you. The clinic thrived. Within 6 months, they were seeing 100 patients a week. Within a year, they had expanded to include dental care and mental health services. Sarah worked herself to exhaustion most nights, but she had never been happier, and Ezekiel had never felt more alive. 5 years into their relationship, on a quiet night when the clinic was unusually slow, Ezekiel went down on one knee in the empty lobby. I know I cannot give you forever, he said, pulling a ring from his pocket. But I can give you every day I have, for as long as you will have me. Sarah, will you marry me? She said yes through tears of joy. and they were married 3 months later in a small ceremony attended by the foundation staff, Sarah's family, and a carefully selected group of vampires who had become friends over the years. Nikolai served as best man, and Jamie stood as maid of honor, and when Ezekiel kissed his bride, he felt 300 years of loneliness finally, blessedly end. The years that followed were the happiest of Ezekiel's long life. He and Sarah worked side by side, building their foundation into something that helped hundreds of people. They traveled when they could, Ezekiel showing Sarah the world he had walked for centuries. They had arguments and reconciliations, quiet nights at home and adventures in the city, all the small mundane moments that made up a life. They did not have children. Sarah's work was her calling, and Ezekiel had lived long enough to know that parenthood was not for him. But they had purpose, and they had each other, and it was enough. When Sarah turned 40, Ezekiel braced himself for the conversation about turning. But it never came. She continued her work with the same dedication, and if she noticed the silver beginning to thread through her dark curls, she never mentioned it. At 50, she finally stepped back from the hospice, transitioning to work exclusively at the nightside clinic in the foundation. Her hands were not as steady as they had been, and the long shifts exhausted her in ways they once had not. "I'm getting old," she said one night, studying herself in the mirror. "You are beautiful." Ezekiel came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "More beautiful than the day I met you." "Liar, but I love you for saying it." She leaned back against him. "I don't regret it, you know. Staying human. Even knowing it means less time with you, I don't regret it." "I know, neither do I." And he meant it. These years with Sarah had taught him that it was not the length of time that mattered, but the depth of connection. He had existed for 300 years before meeting her, but he had only truly lived in the decades since. Sarah retired at 65, finally admitting that her body could no longer keep up with the demands of nursing. But she did not stop working. She consulted for the foundation, trained new staff, and spent her evenings at the clinic, talking with patients, offering the kind of comfort that came only from a lifetime of practice. At 70, she was diagnosed with cancer. Treatable, the doctors said, but aggressive. She underwent treatment with the same stubborn determination she brought to everything, and Ezekiel stayed by her side through every appointment, every procedure, every moment of fear and pain. She went into remission, and they celebrated with a trip to Italy, where Ezekiel showed her the vineyards that had produced the wine from their first evening together. They stood in the autumn sunshine, Ezekiel protected by the broad-brimmed hat and specialized clothing that allowed him to endure daylight for short periods, and Sarah said, "I'm glad I sat down at the wrong table." "It was the right table," Ezekiel corrected, as he always did. It was always the right table. The cancer returned when she was 73. This time it was not treatable. The doctors gave her 6 months, perhaps a year, with aggressive intervention. Sarah chose hospice care. "It feels right," she told Ezekiel. "I've spent my whole life helping people through this transition. Now it's my turn." They moved her into a suite at the foundation's residence facility, the one she had designed specifically to feel like home rather than a hospital. Ezekiel stayed with her constantly, sleeping beside her in the too small hospice bed, holding her hand through the pain and the fear. On one of her last good days, when she was still lucid and the pain medication had not yet clouded her mind, she said, "I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't stop. Don't let the foundation close. Don't let the clinic shut down. Keep helping people even after I'm gone." She squeezed his hand with what little strength remained. "And find a way to be happy again. Eventually. You have so much life left, Ezekiel. Don't waste it grieving for me." "I cannot promise that." "Then promise you'll try. That's all I ask. That you will try to keep living, not just existing." Sarah's eyes were fierce, even sunken and shadowed as they were. "Promise me." "I promise." She died 3 days later, just after midnight, with Ezekiel holding her hand and whispering promises into her ear that she had been loved, that she had mattered, that she would never be forgotten. Her last words were, "Thank you for being my blind date." Ezekiel stayed with her body for an hour afterward, memorizing every detail of her face, saying his goodbyes. Then he stood, straightened his clothes, and walked out into the clinic where the night staff was treating patients who needed care. The work continued. It always continued. He kept his promise to Sarah. The foundation remained open, expanding to serve even more communities. The Nightside Clinic doubled in size, then tripled, until there were branches in 3 cities. Ezekiel managed it all with the same dedication he had once brought to ruling the vampire courts, but now it was driven by love rather than duty. He did not find happiness again, not in the way Sarah had meant. But he found purpose and peace, and in the quiet moments he felt her presence in the structure of the foundation she had built, in the lives they had changed together, in the memory of her laugh and her fierce, stubborn kindness. 20 years after her death, on the anniversary of the night they met, Ezekiel returned to the rooftop restaurant. It was under new ownership now, but the view was the same, the glittering sprawl of Manhattan spread out beneath a star-scattered sky. He sat at the same corner table and ordered the same wine, and for 2 hours he was simply Ezekiel again, remembering the night a woman with wild curls and an unstoppable smile had sat down across from him and changed his life forever. "You must be my blind date," she had said, and he had let her believe it. It was the best mistake he had ever made.